Did your mom pass away in 1970?
February 1970.
Okay. And that was emphysema and influenza?
No, yeah, there was a flu epidemic in Philadelphia. My mom had asthma and emphysema, which is a lung condition. It makes it very difficult to breathe, so they hospitalized her. The infection from the flu apparently was cleared up. The doctor gave her a clearance, but she had difficulty breathing, and so they rushed her to the hospital. And that's how she died, from the emphysema.
At a pretty young age.
And the heart failure.
Yeah.
Yes, 52, just short of 53.
So California was a really big move for your families. What did they think about you being on the West Coast?
Well, not a lot different from Chicago, really. Mom and Dad McGill came out regularly. We used to fly them. Dad's business had picked up. We used to fly my mom and his parents, and they were more than happy to come visit us in California.
My parents always said, "You're so independent," they didn't, I don't think it fazed them in that respect.
What were your impressions of California? You had visited a little bit. Did you enjoy living there from the beginning, or was it a big adjustment?
Well,
Not for me.
For myself, I worked all the time. I worked day and night, during the week anyway. And,
He had long hours. The stock market opened what time? West Coast time.
7.
So he had to be at the office, which was an hour commute, and made for a long day.
How about you, Mom? What was it like raising kids in Moraga?
Well, we had a nice neighborhood. Unlike maybe a lot of situations, we knew everybody. It wasn't that everybody was homogeneous, but we all got along great, and I think it all started with Stella Spiropoulos. She put a huge bag of oranges on our doorstep from her family in Madeira, and I thought, now I can share this with my whole neighborhood. And so I brought oranges across the street and next door, both sides, and everybody started doing that. If somebody baked a pie, the second one they would share with the neighborhood, have people in. It just got to be a very close neighborhood between the Campbells and the Lescovars. It was like a little league of nations between the Yugoslavs, the Greeks. We had a Chinese friend, Nellie, and we had a Jewish friend, their name, Cornfields. And so we used to get together and do the cooking, the ethnic cooking, and have one another in. At that time, all the moms weren't working. So I would do raviolis from scratch, and the neighbors they wanted to learn how to do it. And Stella would do her triropodies, and of course Emma, during the summer, she joined us. It was a great neighborhood. The Hums,
Yeah.
the Hills.
So I always loved sports growing up from a real young age. What kind of memories do you have of me athletically growing up and academically with school too?
Well, I remember year after year, baseball season, we would play catch every single night, and football season, we'd pass constantly, and you were good in sports right from the beginning. You always gave 110%, and I know I coached at baseball and basketball for several years, I guess like roughly 3rd grade through 8th grade.
And academically, I know I always liked school. I always liked to read. I wonder where I got that from. Do you remember much about the academics growing up?
Well, we have to start with Mrs. Westerman. Ava Westerman was an older lady teaching, but one of the best kindergarten teachers you would ever find. And she would be involved at Berkeley with all these innovative things. And so she came to us with some advice and counsel that we took took her up on, and that got you off to a good start. And she loved the Christmas cookie parties that we had for the teachers and the volunteer helpers in the school. I always was involved with that. Every Christmas we would all do a tray of cookies in exchange. So we'd go home, we only had to bake one thing, and we'd go home with a whole tray of assorted cookies. And one year I didn't send out the invitations, and she called and said, "Aren't you going to do it?"
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. We had that at our house.
So I went to Nielsen Nursery School, and Las Perales, where our kids go, and then Joaquin Moraga, where Paige is set to go, and eventually Miramani, which I tried not to go to, but the transfer request wasn't approved, and it worked out really good, I think. So not long after we moved to Moraga, all of our family accepted the Lord. Now, you both grew up spending a decent amount of time in church as kids. What made the difference? What made the light bulb come on spiritually later on to bring about that big change in your faith and in our family's faith?
Well, in Philadelphia, I started out in the parochial school, and I loved it. I just got a love for school early, learning, and the disciplines of study. And then when we moved out to Havertown, that education I got in the parochial school really stood me in good stead. I could write cursive, and I didn't have art or things like that, but I very much appreciate the spiritual foundations. It was very important in my family to honor God, and we never missed church. I can remember even my grandmother going with boots in the snow before, or maybe the car wasn't working, or maybe before the women were driving. But that's impressive to see that. And the spiritual hunger, I was talking to Dad, it was way back when we were dating, because I apparently mentioned to him about the long conversations at Westchester with friends. We would have these theological discussions. I do remember wanting to study the Bible, and my mom making an appointment with the priest. And he said, well, the laymen can't read the Bible for themselves, but now, of course, Catholics have their own Bible studies. But I always had an inclination that way.
Dad, you had attendance awards going to Sunday school, so you obviously went to church a lot as a child.
Yeah, I had the longest unbroken attendance in Sunday school and in the youth choir, Methodist church, but never heard anything about sin or salvation. But I always liked church. In fact, my mother said when I was 9 years old, I said I'd like to be a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Never dreaming the direction my life would take later on.
Yeah.
Many years later.
How that started in our home, was that I always had a desire to teach you children educational, interesting things about nature. I remember at the rental we had a beautiful garden. The people had a gardener come, and all these beautiful plants that I wasn't familiar with. And you guys, you knew Podocarpus, Pantha, and you were just little guys then. And in the Moraga home, I decided that I would like to teach you some of the basics of the Bible, but I didn't know the Bible. So I checked some books from the library on a children's level, and I began to listen to the Bible programs on the radio. One was Through the Bible with J. Vernon McGee.